I think the biggest thing you can do to be awesome at your job is to know your value. You need to understand how you add value in ways that line up with the business and the business strategy. How are you saving money? How are you saving time? How are you being more productive? And have an analysis on that.
That's Dr. Angela Jackson. She's a lecturer at Harvard and the founder of Future Forward Strategies. She's also a widely published expert on the future of work and learning, and the author of the new book, The Win-Win Workplace: How Thriving Employees Drive Bottom-Line Success. So you'll learn 1, what's really behind disengagement at work; 2, how the social contract of work has changed; and 3, the best way to get your boss's support. And if you want a summary write-up of the actionable takeaways, I recommend you sign up for the free Gold Nugget email newsletter. That's at awesomeatyourjob.com, called The Gold Nuggets. I'm Pete Makaitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Angela. Angela, welcome.
Hey, Pete, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to hear your wisdom talking about the win-win workplace. And I'd like for you to kick us off by sharing any particularly surprising, fascinating, counterintuitive discoveries you've made about us humans at work during the course of you putting this together.
So the research that I do at Harvard University that really undergirds this book is really around what helps people thrive in the workplace. And just simple one-liner that came out for me that was really surprising, that won't be surprising to others, that at its base, people just want to know that they matter. And that can be realized and seen in many different ways. And what we tried to do in the Win-Win Workplace book was to identify 9 ways that when people experience these strategies, these behaviors, that they feel like they matter at work.
Whew, I feel like we could talk for 40 extra minutes about that sentence alone. We just want to feel like we matter. So can you maybe unpack that a little bit in terms of what are some work experiences that just say, wow, I feel like I matter a whole lot, versus some work experiences that are like, wow, I feel I absolutely do not matter.
Yeah. And I just want to be clear. A lot of my work, and I've looked at over 1,700 companies. I've never met a CEO or a leadership team who said they don't care about their employees. But what's so fascinating is that when you go and ask rank and file employees, does the company care about them? You have upwards of 60% saying that they don't. So there's this huge disconnect in between what employers, management teams, leaders, executive leaders think that they're doing and what's being actually felt. And so when we talk to like actual everyday workers, things that they said mattered to them was that, one, that there's a recognition from their manager or from the company that they have a life outside of work. And that their life outside of work, their lived realities really impacts their ability to show up engaged in work. So being very specific, if you think about like we're all in this sandwich generation today where, you know, we have kids of our own, we have parents who are elderly, we know the numbers of boomers who are retiring. And so because of that, what we're seeing more and more are that workers are asking for flexibility, not because they want to sit at home and twiddle their thumbs. It's because they're playing defense, you know, at all levels. How are you there for your parents? How are you there for your kids and showing up? And so a bit of flexibility in saying to people, can I adjust your hours by coming in maybe a little bit late? Is there 1 or 2 days that you can work from home? To them, to employees, they've told me that means that their employer actually sees them as a full human.
I hear you. Yes. What's intriguing is with regard to the senior folks, you said they don't say our people don't matter. And yet it is felt at 60% perhaps that it feels that way, that as though we don't matter or they don't care. And it's intriguing in terms of just like the mental processes at work. Do you think what's behind that? Is it perhaps that the senior folks are just so fixated on the results and the pressure and the bottom line and delivering, or what do you think is at the root of this?
Yeah, Pete, I think about this a lot. And I talk about in the book, we've got these win-win workplaces, and we have this other phenomenon that I call zero-sum workplaces. And how I describe a zero-sum workplace are These are very traditional workplaces. They're the ones that say, you have to come into the office because I came in the office. And when I came in the office, this is the way I was mentored. So it's really anchoring what that leadership experience was. It doesn't matter that, they've been 20 or 30 years out of the rank and file. And so it's what we're asking for is a re-questioning and a reimagining of the workplaces for this moment. And so one is a lot of leaders are tied to nostalgia. They'll tell you the great ways that they've been mentored and invested in and how they rose through the ranks. And so it's hard for them to reimagine how mentoring could happen, how could development happen at distance. I was very fortunate early in my career. I worked for Nokia and we were a global firm and I led teams that were based in Singapore. I had colleagues that were in the UK. I worked remotely 50% of the time. And because of the distance, because of the time zones, you really had to put trust in your people. And what I found as a manager is that if people weren't doing their job, it became evident really quickly. But we shouldn't penalize everyone because there's some people that might take advantage of a policy.
So as we contrast a win-win workplace versus a zero-sum workplace, could you give us a couple telltale signs? Maybe it's a number or a metric, or maybe it's a vibe that's like, okay, yeah, this sounds like what a win-win workplace is versus this sounds like what a zero-sum workplace is.
So I'll give you an example of one, and it just popped in my mind. So a few weeks ago, some of your listeners may have seen Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase. They had a town hall meeting. They invited all of their employees to ask questions. One brave soul, he stood up and he asked this question around the return to work policy to Jamie Dimon. I think Jamie would say it wasn't his best day. He totally went off. And then the person went back to their desk and their direct manager said, I can't believe you asked that question. You're fired.
Oh, really?
Really?
I didn't know that part of the story. Okay, keep going.
So Jamie Dimon didn't, I'm sure, and I'm certain that Jamie didn't say to that manager, fire him for asking that question. But what that manager was operating on is that zero-sum workplace. That zero-sum workplace means if you say anything that ticks off the big boss, you are gone. No questions asked. It doesn't matter what you've done, right? And what that did in that moment, they subsequently told him he could keep his job. And so the person stayed there. But you have to think about all of the thousands of people who are watching that moment, right? We say centering worker voice and these town halls are important, but as leaders, how we show up in those spaces really matter. It builds or decreases psychological safety. Like who's going to ask the next question that they think might tick off Jamie? Probably is not coming anytime soon. The second is, how do we train our managers differently? This manager had an old school frame. And if he had been actually trained, knew the policies and procedures, had talked to someone and got advice, that person wouldn't have lost their job. And I wouldn't be able to tell this story today, which is not the best shining example of JP Morgan Chase.
Well, I'm shocked at that notion is about as antithetical to psychological safety as you can get. You said a thing we didn't like, so you're fired. It's like, okay, well, good luck getting any kind of creativity or quality, constructive friction in conversation that leads to goodness, if that's the vibe that we're all keenly aware of here.
Yeah. And you're being invited into a town hall, right? And so this is why we talked about that disconnect. Companies spend billions of dollars on saying that they listen to their people, but it's not felt. Those are just one of those moments. You invite me in to listen, you ask for my advice, and then you blow up.
Yeah.
And so that's the classic. There's many more samples and flavors of that zero-sum workplace. I'm sure what your listeners can listen and lean in on how that looks like. Like we've all had the bad bosses, but it becomes the norm, right? And that's really unfortunate because instead of operating out of creativity, there's a lot of fear. And in general, there's a lot of anxiety in the world today. When you're bringing that in the world of work, it just becomes closer to home.
And what you said there really resonated in terms of, well, when I did this, it worked like this. Like I had to hustle to stay till midnight to be abused verbally by higher ups. And it reminds me, we had a conversation with Rahaf Harfouche, who used the turn of phrase performative suffering, which I thought was just perfect. in terms of like, well, we did it. And so look how much we suffered and we experienced the hardship. And so too, you must. And if not, something is going wrong or it's unfair or I was cheated or there's something that ain't right here.
And people today have a different type of social contract with work. I'm Gen X, and I would think about what I was taught to do is you go into work, you put your head down, you get in before your boss, you leave later, and what you get in exchange for that is a good paycheck, right? Hopefully a good paycheck. What we're seeing now when we're looking at this next generation of workforce, many of them report, 42% said that they would take a pay cut if they could maybe work remotely, if they could have more flexibility. And what we're seeing with all of the research is that people want purpose in their work. They're willing to take less. Some of people want to go away from the big cities and want to be closer to home. What I'm saying is there's a very different calculation today than it was in previous generations. Gen X, the boomers, we were born and raised like I was in Chicago. I was willing to go out to LA and go out to New York. Like we're willing to run and go wherever for that next milestone. And what we're seeing with today's generation, they're not doing that. The second thing is I think about my grandfather who worked at a Chrysler factory. He was there for 40 years. He was part of a union. I was able to go to college because of that. That's not the same with social contract we have today. So you have everyday workers who are watching mass layoffs. When we see that with government jobs that are typically the safest, people immediately think, what's in it for me? What's in it for me to work at a job that could lay me off and I haven't seen my kids in 7 days because I've been traveling, because I've been going in late. And so really today, when we think about employers and CEOs, they're really thinking about what's the value proposition that's going to resonate most to employees today. That's how we're going to keep people. That's how we're going to attract people. And they're actually putting a number on that. So by meeting their needs, reimagining their benefits, reimagining how people are trained and placed in their positions, they're seeing lift on the financial side by implementing these practices. And I just think they're going to be ever needed when we think about the climate now where no one's hiring, right? Everyone's trying to do more with their incumbent workforce. Well, it becomes how do we keep them and keep them engaged so they're not quiet quitting?
Oh, wow. There's so much to dig into here. Let's talk about the social contract in terms of just really articulating that in terms of the old world versus the new world. You highlighted that job security is no longer a thing. That's just kind of not around. And so that changes the calculus. But could you elaborate on your articulation of the social contract between executives and lower level employees in the olden times versus the now times?
So one, you would have, and I think about my parents, your parents, people would stay at their job 20 or 30 years, right? There was loyalty. There were pensions at the time. There was sharing in the success of the company. It was beneficial for people to stay. They were getting bonuses at that time. They had factories and unions that were looking out and making sure that people had benefits and that they could pay for the latest, hospital bill or emergency bill. And what we're seeing today is that people still expect those things. When I say people, everyday workers. For example, there was this Edelman Trust Barometer that came out, and it said that when people think about where they should be upskilled for the future or learn these new future work skills, generative AI, they're looking to their employer for that. Typically in the past, employers did invest in training their people. What we're seeing now is this shift that people are left on their own. And so what does that mean when you are thinking that, you're a cog in the wheel, that any time your job could be eliminated? And maybe that's not because sales are down. Maybe sales are great. And we've seen that with a lot of the tech companies, but they want their share price to rise. So they'll just, again, let people go as a signal to the market that they're being more efficient. Those are things we didn't hear about in the past when we talk about that social contract. You were let go because typically you were underperforming. Someone had, whether you disagreed or agreed, they had a real rationale. It wasn't because we're trying to manipulate the stock market, for example. And also thinking about that social contract, the other thing was the stability that you had raises. There was more employee ownership. There were more pensions. Right now, when you negotiate your wage, that's the best that you're going to do when you're going in the door. Most people know that. And so to get that next raise, right, even if you are awesome at your job, you have to go somewhere else. And what we're seeing now are companies who are letting their best people go because of small things. This return to office is becoming a big thing. We have A players, and there was a research by colleagues out of MIT where companies are losing their A players because there's inflexibility. And what I always say to CEOs are A players always have optionality. So it may not be just in this moment, but they'll have one foot out the door.
So as you sort of lay out the social contract before versus now, it seems kind of like the employee's contract is just worse now than it was then. And the compensation, quote unquote, to keep it fair-ish, is that it's like, well, loyalty is no longer something employees bring to the table. And it just seems like, why would they? That's normal. So is that a fair characterization? If the social contract is worse, what are the employees? Are they just kind of out of luck, or is there a counterbalance on their side?
I absolutely think it's a counterbalance. There's a set of employers who are still interested in that contract, and they're interested in centering what employees want. I'll give you an example. A couple months ago, Spotify put a billboard in Times Square, and it said in substance, we let our people work remote because we hire adults. And some would say, okay, that's cheeky and it's cute, but why did they do that in Times Square? Well, if you look down the street from Times Square, you have JP Morgan Chase that is requiring people to come back in the office. And they know some of those people will leave. And what Spotify is trying to do is say, we're different. And they're using that to actually attract talent, get a talent. And they're seeing a tangible benefit. When I connected with their CEO, he was saying, we attribute our flexibility and our policies and our people policies with keeping our teams. We let them work from wherever they want in the world. We want them to pursue their passions. Why? Because we know that if they're excited in their lives, that they'll bring that excitement to work if we can sustain that. And so while it's broken with certain companies, there are a set of these companies that I write about in that I call win-win workplaces are actually using this as their competitive advantage, this moment and this differentiation.
Now, so in this new contract, Spotify is bringing some things to the table with regard to flexibility, et cetera. They will still fire you readily because, they've had rounds of layoffs and such. But they're bringing some other goodies, such as the flexibility and any other key things you'd highlight there?
Yeah, I think it's flexibility. I think it's passion. When you talk to their employees, they're passionate about what they do. And what gets exciting about that piece is when you've got employees who are passionate about the mission, that they feel supported, what you're building towards is what I call an ownership mindset. And those are the employees, my research shows, are the stickiest, the most loyal. Like they feel bought into what the company is doing and they want to go the extra mile. And it's not just about the paycheck. It's because that company matches up with their values, the way that they live their life. There's not that gap, that air in between the two.
Certainly, it seems like there's got to be something going on in terms of bought into the mission or purpose, or we're having fun solving problems, or there are colleagues that were just a blast to be around who inspire and are fun. Are there any other key bits of value on the employee side that are really getting accentuated these days?
Yeah, the big one is around agency. And so we have a number of companies. The most famous one is we think about Google and their 20% time off to pursue an interest or an innovation. We're seeing more and more companies actually give their people time to tinker. And by that, I mean, some of them are doing it in different ways. They may bring a problem of practice to an ERG group or a group of employees and say, if you can come up with the ideas, all ideas are welcome, and giving people funding and budget to actually work on some of these ideas. Coca-Cola bottlers in North Carolina is doing something very similar. They had a challenge around frontline workers and how we retain them. And so they challenged a group of rank and file employees to come together and solve that problem. And that was an acknowledgement that these people are closest to the problem. So of course they might have some loose solutions to solve it. And so it's innovations like that where people are bringing rank and file into the thinking of the company, into the challenges, and also giving them the agency to begin solving some of these problems.
And I like that a lot in terms of like with the Coca-Cola bottling example with the solving of the problems. Because when I think about purpose, and maybe I just have too high a standard, but I don't imagine, I guess it depends on how you define purpose, and I'd love for you to expand on this, that folks are saying, I am deeply inspired at my core by the mission of getting sugar water into the hands of more and more people and growing the market share, right? I don't think that purpose sense in the Coca-Cola context specifically is resonating. So when you say purpose, are you thinking about something with more broader, with additional facets? Or maybe it's like, hey, you know what? Purpose isn't going to be so much of a motivator in certain organizations. So instead, hopefully, we've got some of that autonomous problem-solving goodness to offer.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your push on this too, Pete. Purpose means different things to different people. And so say you're at a Coca-Cola Ballers, for example, for them, the purpose is at my job, can I be really good at it? And do I have a company that's investing me? And do I feel like my work matters? So that's having purpose versus being at the front line and you're feeling like you're just a number. No one knows your name and what you do. You don't know what you do, how that connects to the overall vision of the company. And that's hard sometimes when you're at the front lines. How do you connect that to the overall strategy and show that through line? So that's one set of purpose. Then you have the other set of purpose where, you use a Spotify or I even use my job at Harvard. I love the research I do. It gives me a sense of purpose that I can work on research around workplaces that help connect people to better companies that are willing to invest in them. And so really thinking about this is something I'd probably do for free that I would talk about. And you have a set of people who are just really connected to what the business is delivering and they find deep value in that. And I believe if you go to some of those employees, they'll tell you why they're excited to get up every day and go to work, what they're learning, how they're growing, being an international company. They're doing a lot of exciting things within the company to keep their people engaged.
And I'd love it if you could share perhaps a favorite story of an organization you've seen really make a transformation or an about face in terms of getting with the program to creating more of a win-win workplace.
One that just came to mind was a CEO of a fast casual restaurant. He brought in me and my research team because, again, with their frontline workers, they were having a challenge around getting them to take advantage of the benefits that the company offered. And the CEO, he was so excited and proud of himself because he offered rank and file employees access to the 401k plans, but he was perplexed because no one took advantage of it. And so he called me in and he's like, Dr. Angela, tell me, what does your research say about this? I would have killed for a benefit like that. And I said, well, I don't know. I was like, have you asked them? And, he hadn't asked them. And to his credit, fast forward, he did end up asking them. And what he learned from his rank and file kind of employees is that the 401k was great. People appreciate it, but they had more present day issues that they needed help with. And we're talking about.
That was my guess. It's like I'm paycheck to paycheck. Saving for retirement would be nice, but that feels more like a luxury at the moment.
Will I be able to retire?
Yeah.
And that was it. And so to his credit, he acknowledged that we did the listening. And what he did was the money they had allocated for that, they put into a flexible fund so that employees would have choice about how they wanted to spend those dollars. So they could spend it on caregiving. They could spend it on transportation. They could spend it on a massage for themselves in the area. But what he was able to acknowledge, and when we went back and talked to employees, one thing that they told us when we asked that same question, do you think your employer cares about it, or give us some examples? They start citing that they had some agency over how these funds were spent. And everyone spent them differently. And what was so interesting that we found after we tracked where they spent the dollars, many of them spent them in their local community with local small and medium-sized businesses. So not only was it great for these employees and giving a sense that this company was actually shoulder to shoulder with them and what they need today, they were also felt good that this was money being driven in the community where the business does business. And I'd say one thing is when we talk to actual employees, they would say, we're appreciative for the 401k, but I'm so happy that I actually get choice. I feel like they really see me and understand me. And again, all of this is around perception when we talk about how we feel at work. So there's intentions, and then there's how those intentions are received. And what I'm seeing with these win-win companies they're really keen on tracking how it's being felt and experienced by the rank and file employees so that they actually get it right and not assuming that they know what's best and what they want.
Oh, yes. That is... In my entrepreneurial journey, I have made that mistake numerous times. People should want this because it's cool, as opposed to, well, do they actually? And you must ask. So that's handy. So you lay out in your book, The Win-Win Workplace, 9 strategies for creating better workplaces. Could you share with us a favorite in terms of it just being tremendously transformational and high ROI. Like, this is not that hard, and yet it makes a world of a difference. So come on, workplaces, everyone should just go ahead and do this.
Yeah. And I have to say, a lot of this book and what pleased me about it is these are common sense things. And what we notice with our conversations with leadership is that it's harder to put them into place because what it really takes is one, intention, two, and what we write about this in the book is a commitment to measuring this. We do lots of things for people. We don't ask their feedback on them. The second thing is we don't measure if it's effective. And this is a problem with a lot of the plans and trainings that we do in the world. And again, billions of dollars spent, but the outcomes, we're not really seeing any of them. And so what we're asking companies to do in this moment is to reevaluate how you're training people, how you're developing people, and really think about what's adding value for them and making sure that it's actually adding value for the bottom line. And these 9 practices in particular, they show a correlation to output lift on the financial side. And that's really important because what we're trying to do is move conversations around investing in people just as an expense or the charitable thing to do to one, actually seeing it as a revenue driver.
Yeah, well, I totally buy it in terms of, and maybe if you could just specify the mechanism of action here, because it kind of seems like the extent to which people, human beings, are feeling good things and able to take care of themselves, their lives, that which is important to them, their health, they are able to show up and be smart and creative and engaged and rocking and rolling. And so that just seems intuitively, commonsensically true, but it is kind of a trickier thing to measure.
It is and it isn't. So the one way that we've mapped out, and for this case study, we talk about the private equity firm Blackstone. They have hundreds of portfolio companies. And one thing that they did is they did their research across their portfolio companies. They saw that investments in talent, they were able to map out an ROI. And so what we found were, and what they found were investing in actually training people to manage people had an ROI. And how they mapped that was amongst retention. They did pulse surveys about frontline. How did they feel about their managers? Would they recommend their managers? And then what they were able to do in terms of some of the financial institutions that they looked at, they had measures, for example, on cash on hand and assets under management. They noticed that people, when the employees were happier and that they felt great about their manager, that some of their businesses had more assets under management and they had higher sales. And so they were able to disaggregate that. And so we tell employers, find 2 to 3 metrics that you think are key, that you think would show you the health of your employees. Have those metrics on the same dashboard that you're thinking about. What's our sales over this quarter? How many products have we produced? What services did we put out? And have those same 3 metrics. So you should be looking at them. So 1, get a baseline. 2, think about the problem or practice or opportunity you see with your talent. Is it around training? Is it around training managers? Is it about reimagining benefits? Is it about like building your deep pipeline? And just think about what those 2 to 3 measurements are and begin to measure them quarter over quarter. And again, it's going to vary from company to company, but just once you have those 3 metrics, you're going to have 2 measurements that you'd say, if this is going right, this is how we know. This is the effect that it will have on the bottom line. So it's an art and a science, but it's absolutely doable and it doesn't have to be cumbersome. We're not saying measure 20 different things. We're saying what are the 2 to 3 people metrics that are most important to your business and the business model and the bottom line.
Well, this brings me back to one of my favorite consulting projects in which we were trying to reduce attrition at some call centers. And so I, as a lowly analyst, my job was to create an actual tool that actually measured real attrition. And so I was creating this spreadsheet and it was so fun because like every day or a couple days, more people said, oh, hey, can you add me to that daily list? And so it's like I was the keeper of the real attrition numbers. And I had I guess my first professional audience. And the email list was growing and growing and growing. And sure enough, once they got engaged, there was real numbers, the excuses disappeared, and we got real about the interventions. And we could see in terms of more experienced representatives have a lower average handle time on the phone, resulting in more cost-effective solutions and answers to customers. And so we can sort of see that line very clearly, and it's cool. Can you share with us, in terms of, you mentioned higher sales or assets under management, can you connect the dots a little bit between, we did a thing and it made people happier and somehow dollars came out the other side?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a healthcare system, and what they were having issues with all of healthcare systems across the country is retaining talent. You have nursing shortage, you have frontline kind of worker shortage in healthcare. And so what they did was implement two things that they did were great. One was a flexibility around scheduling. So many people who, if they're listening and know healthcare, it's one of those tenured issues. Like if you're the new nurse in, you get the worst shift. Tenured, you get the better shift. They try to, one is just reimagine that and be more equitable and fair in their scheduling so that new nurses don't always get the most terrible shifts. Because what they found out through measuring it, that was actually burning them out. They were able to reduce turnover with nurses by 10%. That was really significant because the average turnover, they said, of a nurse cost them $180,000. So when you think about that across 3,000 nurses, that's real dollars and cents that they were able, just by tweaking the schedule and understanding. They started with listening, trying to understand what were the barriers, why were people leaving, and what would make them stay. Two, they knew what their baseline is. And then three, they got real about what you said, the cost of attrition. I was surprised with my number of companies that how many of them didn't have a real grasp on the cost of attrition. So, most people might think attrition is just the person leaving their job. Attrition is also the time that you spent finding that person, the time that you spent training them over the years, the value that they had. And now it's the cost you need to find someone else and to train them. And they're not going to be as good as the person who's been there for 4 or 5 years because it takes that onboarding time and getting up to productive speed. The second thing this healthcare center did, and they found that one thing in common is that people wanted training. And so what they began doing is offering training benefits. If it was anything related to a person's job that they wanted to learn, or if they wanted to go back to get their degree, they were giving them a pool of funds. And they watched, of the people who took advantage of this training, how longer they stayed versus others. The people who took advantage of training stayed 30% longer. And again, in a healthcare field where tenure actually really matters, people get better at their jobs and costs are going up when you're trying to replace talent, 30% longer became very substantial to their bottom line. And so they reinvested those dollars into more training, more internship, and just doubling down on what the nurses and other healthcare providers said they needed.
And Angela, I'd love your take if we could shift gears for a moment away from the executive strategic level to, let's say you are an individual contributor listening to this and say, okay, that sounds really cool. I'd like some of these goodies. Do you have any pro tips on how we can make the case for whatever it is that we think would help us to flourish? It sounds like we've got a clear situation along the lines of getting some numbers and a financial ROI case to be made. What are some of your other pro tips for folks who find themselves in that position?
I think the biggest thing you can do to be awesome at your job is to know your value. You need to understand how you add value in ways that line up with the business and the business strategy. So for one, every company that I'm out talking to now, they're thinking about their generative AI strategy. This is new for everyone. And what a rank and file person who's working, you know your job intimately, you're expert at your job. You should be thinking about, how do you add value with the new technology? How are you saving money? How are you saving time? How are you being more productive? And have an analysis on that. When you go in and you're talking to your manager, the second thing you need to do is speak their language. And so going in and knowing how you've been more productive, what you've added in your value, and talking about that in terms, starting with that, and then telling your manager or leadership who you're in front of what they can do to help you be even more efficient. So you're really couching it in what it's in their best interest to do this. You're saying, I'm an A player. This is what I've delivered. And from my job, I've noticed if I could get XYZ support, I could be even more productive. So for example, I'm in Boston. We have the worst traffic in the country. And so what I saw one employee do, she went in and instead of saying, I want more flexibility to work, she'd say, this is what I produced last year, but I did notice that I spent 4 hours. Her commute was 2 hours back and forth.
Oh, geez.
In traffic. I think that if I could leave and show up to work either flexible 6 a.m. and get off earlier, or come in late, that I could be more productive. I could also be more productive if I could have one day of non-commute time. Laying it out like that, she got a great response because you're leaning on with curiosity, you're coming in with data, and again, you're centering what matters most to them and you're helping them help you help them.
Is that a movie? Help me help you help help them. That's good. Well, Angela, tell me any other key things you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I just want to just double down on the point I just made, in this time and in this moment particularly, we have to advocate for ourselves. I think about people who are in jobs today who have ideas on how to improve the company, how they can be more productive. Make sure you're communicating those to your direct manager. Make sure that you're getting face time with the more senior management. Make it your business to do that. People need to know you exist. I'll give you an example. I have a very dear friend that was in DC, and she was part of the latest rounds and cuts at the IRS, and she's a tax attorney. And she goes, for a time, I didn't even have a manager for 4 months. And I told her, I wish I had have known, because if you can't find the person who manages you, or if they're not paying attention, you need to find the next person up the ring to do that. And then 2, these strategies give you that economic case and argument. And so once you make it to your employer, they may respond favorably, they may not. I always say that's data. If they're not giving you what you need, there's a host of employers who are looking people like you, who are adding value and who are thinking differently. So I'd say be on the lookout for those employers, and also bring the ways that you've been adding, lead with the ways that you're adding value when you speak to them.
Big thanks to Angela for sharing her wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. All right. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
Whatever you can, do. And whatever you do, do it to the best. And that's one of the Goethe quotes. And then I love this other one by Howard Thurman, and I have actually just write it in my book. It says, whatever you want to do in the world, do something that lights you up, because the world needs more people who are lit up. And again, that's by Howard Thurman.
All right. And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
Oh, gosh. My favorite one was putting up a worker advisory board. We had 200 workers from across the U.S., red states, blue states, across different sectors, and really worked with them to help place them in jobs that were impacted by the pandemic. And we're able to study what happened to them once they were placed in the jobs. And that actually became the research that undergirds the book. We found somewhere in these what we now call win-win workplaces, and the others were in what we call a zero sum, where people didn't want to work there. They were quitting. They weren't staying. They had regular turnover, and just really understood that the difference between the workplaces were these 9 strategies, how they were investing in their people.
All right. And a favorite book?
I think my biggest one is Outrageous Openness. And it's just around being open to what's happening in the world, being curious and outreaching.
All right. And a favorite tool?
Right now, my favorite tool, honestly, is ChatGPT. And can I tell you why?
Yes.
We talk about being productive. Some people have zero inbox. I've not gotten there yet, but it helps me be more productive with my responses and doing it in a more timely fashion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a huge fan of the Superhuman app, and they've been incorporating some AI features that I'm genuinely impressed. It can now clearly label podcast pitch in all of my incoming emails. And so I could just very quickly go, forward. So my producers get those fast. I was like, okay, well, that's 90 emails out of my inbox in about 3 minutes. That felt pretty productive. What else is in there?
And don't you feel good at the end of the day? You're like, I've done my job. I'm not the bottleneck. It's like playing tennis. Hit the ball over the net.
Totally. And a favorite habit?
My favorite habit is meditating every morning. I don't do it for long. I'm not one of those gurus. I do about 5 minutes. I get clear on the day. I say what I'm grateful for from the day before. And it actually centers me to have a better day.
Okay. Is there a key nugget you share that really connects and resonates with folks that you're known for?
The time to make friends is before you need them.
All right. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
So they can go more in the book. They can go to readwinwinworkplace.com. Also, I'd love to share with your listeners, we're doing our first summit on the win-win workplace. We've got 80 employers who are actually practicing these principles and using these strategies to see the ROI. We're doing that in Chicago on May 5th and 6th, and it's open to everyone. I say employers, managers come, but even people who are looking for their next opportunity, these are the employers you want to be in front of that'll be in that room. And you can go to winwinsummit.org for that.
All right, Angela, this is fun. Thank you.
Oh, Pete, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
I love Angela's perspective on making the case in your boss's language for what you need. And it's so funny. I am my own boss, and I do this to my own self all the time. And maybe I'm just doing the classic thing where we want what we want and emotions run things and then we rationalize them later. But it is almost just my default operating mode in terms of, there's something I think I'd like. Well, make the case for it, Pete. You can't just have the Bose Quiet Comfort Ultra noise-canceling headphones because you want them. You have to make the case to yourself. But then I do. I say, well, take a look at the background noise, in particular, this frequency. They are remarkable at attenuating this frequency range, which is the most distracting, most loud thing that is in my environment and substantially superior to my many years old previous generation of noise-canceling headphones. And thusly, that will improve my productivity. And just this many minutes will result in those being paid for themselves in mere weeks. Thusly, this is a robust return. So it's become second nature for me, but I recommend, if it's not second nature for you, you find a way, you tie your request to improved productivity, to results, money, ROI things, and away you go. It's like, hey, when I worked from home, I was able to accomplish so many more crucial pieces of work output because I wasn't distracted by all of the chatter in the office. And boy, if I could do that 50 times a year, that could be substantial in terms of us meeting these goals. So great stuff there and everywhere from Angela. If you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please drop on by awesomeatyourjob.com/EP1053. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.